Hi everyone and welcome to today's Guest Talks webinar, Creating a Thriving School, Empowering Teachers and Students for Wellbeing. We're delighted to have you with us for what will be an engaging and insightful discussion. The positive school environment plays a vital role in the success and well-being of both teachers and students. But how can schools create a culture where everyone feels supported, valued and empowered to thrive? Today we're going to explore practical strategies for fostering well-being, covering everything from workload management and relationship building to mindfulness and mental resilience. We're joined by some expert speakers who will share their insights and actionable approaches to help create a more supportive and nurturing learning environment. Before we begin, just a quick reminder that you'll find a Q&A tab on the side of your screen. So feel free to send in your questions and our speakers can get to them throughout the discussion, or we'll save a bit of time at the end for those. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's chair, Tracy Moxley. So over to you, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Millie, and hi to everyone who is zooming in to our discussion today. I would like to introduce to you some experts in the field, and I'm going to leave them to do their own introductions because I think they will do themselves so much more justice. But with us today, we have Monisha, Rob, Priya and Berna. And Berna, welcome, who all have really interesting backgrounds and experience and have worked with schools for many years and others in the field of well-being. So welcome to everyone. And Berna, would you like to just do a brief introduction?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I am Berna. I'm from South Africa originally, have been working in education and inclusion for the last 25 years. Love what I do. I'm quite passionate about inclusion. And back in the UAE, I was in the UK for a few years, back in the UAE and working for GESS Education as their lead for all things special needs and well-being and inclusion. And then the light goes off. So thank you for having me.
That's sustainability, of course. Priya.
Of course.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Priya, and I'm a social worker and counsellor. I've been in the UAE since about 2013, working in schools as a counsellor in DSL, but for the last year and a half, roughly, I've been delivering training and consultation to schools all around safeguarding and the well-being of students. And I'm really pleased to be able to join you all this afternoon.
Oh, welcome. Monisha.
Hi everyone, my name is Monisha. I've lived in the UAE since 1993, so pretty much all my life. I did my engineering, master's in engineering, and then I experienced burnout when I was doing live events for 12 years, which is why today here I am really passionate about bringing in wellness, bringing in self-awareness, and reaching a state of emotional and mental well-being. And that's what I'm doing right now, and I absolutely love it. Thank you for having me here.
Oh, thank you so much. It sounds like quite a journey that you've been on. And last but not least, Rob. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Rob. I'm currently based in Abu Dhabi high school. Well, I'm head of middle school, but my background was, I was just explaining to the guys before, I worked in the same school in the UK for about 20 years, and I don't think I would have thought I'd have made this journey so late in my career. But I sort of fell out a little bit with the UK in terms of well-being, and set up an alternative provision which basically looks after children that were finding schools difficult, having lots of challenges, and they were a lot to do with well-being and in managing their emotions. And then I got the opportunity to come out to Abu Dhabi, and I've had a real challenging and exciting journey out here because I've been able to use my background in sport and pastoral and academic leadership roles that I had in the UK, but also then now with an amazing sort of 2.5 years of learning in terms of running a business around managing children with sort of extreme emotional difficulties, and I've been able to bring that into the school that I'm in at the moment. So my journey is maybe slightly different. I don't think if you'd have asked me a couple of years ago, I would have been where I am, but I suppose I've got like quite a unique sort of background now in terms of being able to put into practice the things that we've been working on in the last few years.
So, I mean, I would just tell you just briefly, I have also spoken and delivered conferences on social media and well-being, particularly around teenagers. I think everyone finds school really difficult at times, adults, principals, all the teachers and the kids, and we deal with it in different ways. And I understand all of those pressures. I've actually worked in a number of countries around the world, and I find teenagers are teenagers and schools are schools and people are people, and we all deal with all of these things. So thank you to all of you. I was just briefly speaking to Rob, and we were talking about that. And do you think that the focus on mental and physical well-being, the increase recently, is because we're more aware of it? Is it because we've had COVID? Or, you know, because we haven't genuinely placed a premium on it before, and we know it's super important for students to do really well. So just want to throw that out there, because I think contextually, I feel like we still haven't cracked well-being. I was looking at this, these KHDA standards. I don't know if you can see that on well-being, and the mark now that schools have to have and actually give themselves a rating on different aspects of well-being. And I often find that happens when things haven't happened. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So yeah, what do you think, Monisha? What do you think about that question of? Are we seeing more of it, or has it always been there, or is it because now we've put a lens on it?
That's a great question, because I honestly feel I'm seeing a lot more of it, having grown up in Dubai myself all these years, and just thinking back about my school experience and university experience. We didn't have names for what we were experiencing. We just had to deal with them as children by ourselves, you know, and teachers were not really equipped to assist us because we wouldn't know how to deal with what we were experiencing. And if I have to look back and just see the amount of stress we would go through as children, to this day, I get nightmares about missing out exams, you know, I mean, that's the kind of impact it has on you. And when I see what schools are doing today, and when I hear it from my friends and my family members, I see the effort is real, but I almost feel that sometimes it's something that's added to a checklist that a school has to do, you know, and that just adds on and adds to further stress. But if we find a way to integrate it into the learning experience that children have, rather than having it as a separate thing altogether, and you can bring it into a classroom and really support the teachers while they're doing this work, so they have the awareness as well, and they're equipped to be able to see the signs, whether there's certain students that need that assistance. If they can see that and recognize it, then yeah, I mean, that would be a huge step. Just seeing from where I've come from, you know, that small change.
And that needs to happen, because I was reading a recent, I think, journal of medical science. They did some research in 2022, and it was a surprise to me. I did not know that 50% of teachers consider quitting due to pressures affecting health and well-being. So it's not only our students, and we have a recruitment issue with teachers because they're experiencing the same thing. For me, I look at what we're doing, you know, what we were doing 120 years ago. We're still doing it now. We're still having exams. We're still having the revision. We're still having the pressures. We're still placing such a high premium on grades and all of that. Are we surprised that we're still getting the stress and the kind of the affecting negatively our kids' well-being? That, I mean, I'm exaggerating for effect. Priya, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I mean, it's when we look at mental well-being, you know, we need to look at like all of the stakeholders within a school community. So I know Monisha's talked about as a young person at school, the pressures that you were under, the pressures that our children are under now. and that teachers maybe didn't have the right training. And one of the things that I often wonder about in terms of what you were saying in the recruitment crisis is exactly what are we doing for our teachers? You know, there are some schools I know that went from kind of middle of August last year to the second week of December without a single, well, they had maybe 2 or 3 days off for Eid, and we were expecting teachers to work right through. So when our teachers are burning out, it's hardly surprising. So you know, we need to look at, yes, there's picking up on what Monisha was saying about teacher PD and providing them that information and training around spotting mental wellbeing signs. But we also need to be looking at what do we do to promote the wellbeing for our teachers, because we know if our teachers are not, if their wellbeing isn't great, they're going into the classroom and their cups aren't filled. So how are they filling up the cups of our students?
Yeah, and they're not noticing. I don't know if we've again, you know, we've gone through this kind of change with COVID, where actually we then became quite alert and aware of well-being and not having the human connection and all of that. And then when that finished, we've kind of, I feel like we've gone backwards and we've gone straight back, and we're talking about the learning gap with COVID, and we need to get in there and actually, you know, pummel our kids because they've got to catch up and all of that. And so I don't know if we're helping or hindering at the moment. So yes, Rob, what do you think on this one?
Yeah, well, I sort of think when you mentioned COVID, I think COVID brought it to everyone's attention, didn't it? I think that's the main role that COVID sort of played. And then since COVID, I think you're right. I think the pressures were on schools to bridge that gap a little bit, and maybe that was the wrong approach. I sort of think, from my perspective, where I've been previously, in that if you look at the standards for a well-being mark or whatever, do the standards have a student standard and a staff standard? Because the way I sort of view it is, we should have everyone in the building standard, and it shouldn't be staff and students. We should be caring for the well-being of everyone who comes into our community. So when we've been working out in Abu Dhabi, and I've had a sort of, if you like, a fresh start at it, that was part of it, is to educate the staff and do staff training first. That happened in August, to sort of find out what they understood about, you know, managing emotions, and did they understand their own, and if they didn't even understand their own, how then we asking them to try and manage young people's emotions. So we started from there, and I sort of think if it is just a child standard, you end up with a little bit of a bolt on, rather than a more holistic sort of approach that's actually going to be effective. You know, and I always remember being back in the UK when we were trying to manage that gap, the most effective strategy we had for improving performance was asking teachers to go and find young people at break time and have a conversation with them about an interest. Not 2 more hours revision, or it was actually more personal sort of interventions to make the children feel like they were part of the community. And then that in turn made the teachers have a better understanding about some of the young people they were working with. So from my point of view, yes, COVID did highlight it. And I think now we've got an opportunity to not have it as a bolt-on, to actually feed it into our daily, you know, every policy we have, every practice we have, it should be there as, you know, our way of working, our way of life, if you like.
Yeah. So what I want to pick up on something that Monisha said, and just reference back to what you've just said, which is the barriers to implementation. So if we haven't cracked it, we know exactly what we need to do and we know how to do it, but we are finding it's difficult to do because of a number of things we've talked about: teachers, PD and awareness and EQ and all of that. We've talked about not having it as a bolt-on, which again, sometimes I feel like it is. It's kind of a bit of PE we'll do it there. I don't know whether that's like health education and people feel like it fits their best. But actually, isn't it the person that sees you every morning, first thing, and understands you? And that tutorial program is always something I feel is kind of, here's the notices. And then I don't know if we've really, again, developed it to a point where actually we can just scrap what we're doing in the morning and actually do well-being and have human conversations with our children. I mean, I don't know, what do you think? What are those barriers? Is it about the leader in the school? Is it about PD? What is it? Is it about the schedule? Are we trying to fit more things into an already bulging schedule? What can we lose? Berna.
So if I can jump in there, I think it's systemic, because what we have actually done is we have supercharged our children's timetables. There's so much to do. There's so much to learn. Let's rush. Let's get there. I mean, if you look at the research, we are having children who's 3 years old sit the whole day and write. They're not made for that.
No.
If you look at the X-rays of their little hands, the bones aren't connected yet. They cannot write. What are we doing? But what we have done is we've brought the higher curriculum, and I understand that we all understand the neuroplasticity and the way that education has formed to bring the more complex down into the schools. But what we've done is we've supercharged our curriculum. And on top of that, we are so competitive. So that whole Ubuntu, that whole community feel has actually now gone to, it's all about me. So my child has to be the fastest, they have to swim, they have to do all of these things. So it's not just in the school. It's not just about the culture. It's not, you cannot timetable well-being. It cannot be something we do. It has to be who we are. And one of the things that I've seen in the UK, I've seen in South Africa, and I've seen here in Dubai is we are in so much competition with our own pasts as teachers, as parents, and we truly want what's best for our children. But what we do is we are scheduling their lives so full that they don't actually have time to breathe. And I've got a brilliant friend, David Bartram, who always says 1 million minutes. That's the amount of minutes you spend in school from the age of 3 till the age of 18, 1 million minutes. And when in the last million minutes did we not as adults feel overwhelmed, or as parents feel overwhelmed, or as bus monitors feel overwhelmed? So well-being cannot be scheduled, but it has to be in the fabric of who we are. So we kind of have to change the system to be able to actually do it in a way that our little ones get it. When I was a head of school in the UK, the most incredible thing I used to do was every Tuesday morning between 7:15 and 9:15, I would just go and sit in the nursery between those 2-year-olds. They don't care. They don't even know who I am. It was the most amazing experience because they just love you.
I bet they did know who you are, though, Berna. I bet they did.
So it's those highs and buys. It's that Friday morning dance party outside the school where the head of school or the head teacher plays music and every child laughs at the head teacher for dancing, but they're smiling as they go into school. And I think we have this happiness and this well-being agenda, and I totally appreciate the fact that it's been put in because I think it's so important. But we cannot actually mandate happiness.
Yeah,
we need to slow down. Damien Bachu always used to say, schools are very good at adding, but we're not so good at subtracting. The school is overwhelmed. The parent is overwhelmed. The world is overwhelmed. The world is overwhelmed. So we had the opportunity during COVID to slow down and cut back and actually do this differently, and we didn't. So I do think it's all of those things that you've mentioned. But more than that, I think our newer generation, if I look at my own boys who's 18 or 20, they take their own time, their own well-being much. They switch off the computer at night and say, no, now it's me time. And I actually think there's a new generation coming through who are more of their time, which is beautiful, actually.
They're getting a bad rap for it, aren't they, though? That's the other thing. But
we need to let them good at what they're good at.
They're quite surprised because they've probably been used to a generation who've said yes. and who are on the computer at 10 o'clock in the evening and are working away, I'm going to be the worst one for that. So I'm going to put my hand up and say, yeah, I have real problem saying no, I can't do that right now. I'm going to, put myself first and my mental and physical well-being. So if you have people like me around, I'm a really bad role model, basically, for everyone else. The point is, how can we make those changes with our teachers? Linda on here, I just saw one of her points about teacher training and EQ and all of that. Do we put a greater emphasis on the emotional quotient? Do we have teacher training where we just want teachers to be human beings and actually like the kids that they're teaching and show them that they like them and show them that they care? Because actually we also know that improves our results.
Absolutely. Happy children learn better. It's the truth.
They do. And I remember going to a conference, and Monisha, I'll bring you in, when I was thinking, I asked the question, who's the teacher you remembered when you were in primary school? Everyone had a teacher. Everyone was like, I remember how they made me feel, not what they made me do. So Monisha, what's your take?
So, I mean, following up on what Berna said and what you mentioned, Tracy, it almost feels like where we are today with schools as well sounds the same like when I was in school, and that was ages ago. I mean, the schedule was jam-packed. Yeah. We never had a break between our classes. We had maybe a 20-minute lunch break, and you're waking up early. And even today, I hear of children waking up at 6 o'clock, and they're so young. The sun hasn't even risen, and they're waiting for their bus, And that morning time is so precious to really supercharge your day. And that's when you're either stuck in traffic or you're waking up early. And, it does take an ecosystem here, right? It's the home environment, it's the school, it's the child itself. And if I have to look back at teachers that really made an impact, they were the ones who saw me, because I was really never seen. I was a wallflower. No one even knew I was there, right? The ones who saw me, the one who understood that Monisha's going through something, I need to have a conversation with her and just be real with us, And you could tell that teachers were frustrated because there's just so much of workload, and you just end up presenting it to children who are really sensitive in those formative years. And you carry that with you. You wonder, what did I do wrong, And then you go home carrying that baggage as well as young children. So I just feel that if we simplify it, like Berna was saying, it's not something that we can consider as separate. Wellness has to be a part inside of the whole learning experience. We cannot use it as just boxes to tick. And it's simple stuff, it's like come down to just learning breathing exercises, and you can help students who are having a really stressful moment, or, the first thing they do is they hyperventilate when they're stressed. So how do you bring a child to calm down, and what can you do in that moment? Those are crucial moments. So it's simple stuff, but I just feel that if we just integrate strategies like, instead of a teacher reacting to a situation, can you be the model of calm when there's chaos, instead of playing into the chaos, and just finding someone else to blame? Can teachers really see the potential of a student instead of seeing how disciplined and how quiet they are in class? And that makes you a good student. When they're able to express themselves, we shut them down because they're not kind of going with the group, but rather can we nurture that gift? I know that there were so many moments teachers could have nurtured it for me, but as an adult today, I'm starting to do it for myself. And it's a great learning experience, but it would have completely changed my childhood had that been those moments where teachers really saw you. But rightly said, if they're not in the right state of mind, if they can't be present because they're burning out, how can we expect teachers to do that, right? So it has to go everywhere. It cannot be for just the teachers and the students. It's in the leadership as well.
100%, totally agree. And so we're saying it needs to be in the DNA. So that brings me to Priya and to Rob. So how can we, bearing in mind all the things we talked about, because we're not going to be able to change the bigger ecosystem right now, what can we do in our schools that will help make well-being part of the DNA and not just an add-on? What kind of strategies, what kind of initiatives? Rob, Priya, what do you think?
Do you want to go, Rob?
I can do if you want. I was just going to say, Berna, what you said about the 1,000,000 hours. You know, if you asked a child when they finished the 1,000,000 hours, what were the
minutes, million minutes.
Sorry, yeah, minutes. What would
it just feels like 1,000,000 hours, Rob.
Like, I think I've done 10 million. But what would be their memories, and you know, from school? And I think we have to take more student voice into account. You know, what's the reason you are coming to school? And as much as we want to be a brilliant maths teacher, science, they're probably going to say things like PE, music, drama, seeing my friends, having fun, and it's those sort of things. And I think if we've got an environment where the stakeholders are miles apart, it's never going to be an effective place to learn, is it? So I think that's the first thing. We've got to listen to the people in the building, and that's got to be the staff, and that's got to be the children. So just sort of, I can answer that question because if you like, I was told I couldn't do anything for 100 days when I first started. So I was just looking and sort of seeing what was going on in a new school for me, and then just to sort of assess and then come up with a plan, if you like, for the school I'm in. So we sort of looked at 4 areas. So we looked at the policies and the practices in terms of what was going on with the well-being in the school, and it was are people connected or are people miles apart? So what was the reason for coming to school? So we sort of looked at that a little bit to see if we could align those a little bit. We then looked at the learning and the teaching. So we asked the children what they liked about the lessons, what they didn't particularly like about the lessons, and we introduced a couple of little things. So actually the children wanted a little bit more structure. So they wanted similar things at the start of an English lesson and the start of a math. So we introduced something which I used a few years ago in England, which was called a do it now. So every lesson had a do it now at the start. So the children knew that was the start of the lesson, and there was a nice structure. The staff knew there was a nice structure. So that was a nice, easy way of the children and the staff having a pleasant and polite and being able to smile and be successful at the start of the lesson. So we looked at some things around learning and teaching. We looked at some things around consistency of like behaviour policy and behaviour systems in school, because there was a little bit of, if you went into a certain part of school, you were able to get away with a lot more, and that inconsistency, while it was some of the children were enjoying that, actually most people in the building wanted it to be more consistent. So we looked at that, and we also then looked at some training. So that was definitely starting off with the staff. But then when you were just mentioning about breathing exercises and what we can actually do, we've introduced something here called the Wellbeing Toolbox, which has 5 strategies to deal with regulating and managing your emotions when you get into those times where you're frustrated, you're angry, you whatever, and you do sort of, if you wanted to look at it simplistically, flip from the green side of your brain to the red, where you sort of fight and flight and you're not making logical decisions. So all the way from kindergarten to grade 12, I think we've got 6 wellbeing toolboxes for the different parts of the school, and also a staff wellbeing toolbox. So we've sort of worked on that together. And part of our program is, when you were mentioning about the form times, was that we're going to teach those strategies, and then the children or the staff are then able, when they do have those moments where emotions are heightened a little bit, they've got a toolbox to be able to dip into and go, right, okay, this is what I'm going to do to stay a little bit calm. And then we get less of those emotional outbursts or those fight or flight moments. Yeah. And the building is calmer and learning is better. And, and we have more fun. Yeah.
Normally, those kinds of sessions were only dedicated to students who did go from 1 to 100, and none of the other students actually got to benefit from the kinds of strategies that would be great. And we'd clump all those students together for effect now, and we'd send them off somewhere with somebody who would, I
suppose, do we think those children that sort of we didn't deal with in that situation never had those items?
They're the ones that are not able to release that.
They're just maybe better at masking it or hiding it, or and actually they might need it as much, if not more, than some of the people who actually they release their emotions, and it's clear when they do. And but some people are very good at disguising it and hiding it and coping with it. Of course they are. So so we've sort of brought in if you like, everyone gets access to learning about the toolbox. We've got some group sessions going on for some people that work in groups, and then, like you say, you still will need those one-to-one sessions for those people that absolutely need them. But everybody gets a little bit of something, because that's really important.
So Priya, you're I know that both yourself and Berna, you're doing safeguarding, inclusion, some of those students that we've always kind of thought that it's those kids that we need to work on, but actually it's all of us. All of us need to feel like we're thriving, that we're mentally and physically healthy. In terms of those strategies that Rob's highlighted, which are great, what else would you add to that? What else can we add to the mix so that these things are available in schools and people don't feel stigmatized? I mean, that was the other issue from that kids didn't want to go to X or Y because they were being identified or stereotyped or whatever. If it's something that we're doing holistically with all of our children, surely that's a much better way forward.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting listening to what Rob was saying, because I've written down student agency as well and student voice. And also, as you were saying about the emotional regulation and the children who kind of blow their tops, whereas there are lots of children, and it's a safeguarding issue around the amount of children who've got anxiety and depression. And does that lead into the more worrying safeguarding mental well-being, the self-harm, suicidal ideation? They're the ones that are sitting quietly. They're not the ones that are blowing their top, and therefore not getting to see the counsellors. And having worked as a counsellor and supporting counsellors at the moment, I know that our counsellors are totally overrun. And often that's because actually the counsellors are not being used the way that they should be. I think we need to peel it back as well and go back to what we were saying really early on about relationships and a sense of belonging. And that when children come into school, if they're in a tutor group or a homeroom group, whatever we want to call it, but if they've got somebody who's that pastoral leader who sees them every morning and can pick up the nuances, the behavioural nuances, and helping teachers to understand that children walk into school, we don't know what's happened to them before they've even walked into school, and rather than, like you were saying, Tracy, you're absolutely right, not sitting there reading notices for the 15-20 minutes. The really amazing pastoral teachers that we have, the ones who really, really get it, are the ones that actually spend that 20 minutes spending time with the children, asking how the children are, doing some kind of an activity. And that leads us back to what children remember. They remember those teachers who remember us, who knew something about us, knew that we had a cat called Fred, or whatever it is, that have made that, that whole, I mean, we talked about COVID. What did COVID teach us? Social connectedness, that sense of belonging. That's so important. And sometimes I feel as though, like we were saying, we keep putting things in, and maybe we need to, like Berna said, subtract all the way back to basics. How do we form those relationships with our students so that we become those trusted adults, that they seek us out when they are having a bit of a tough time? Because there is a lot of pressure on them. So things like that, I think we have to be very careful as well around putting in what we say, right, we're going to do this for everyone. So for instance, I've worked in situations where, like, we have mindfulness. At the beginning of every staff meeting, everyone's going to do mindfulness. And actually I was like, I don't want to do mindfulness with 30 people in a room. Like, this isn't mindful for me. This is causing the anxiety. So, I have to be aware that I understand why they might want to bring mindfulness. but that it can't be a one size fits everyone. So yeah.
So actually, I remember in many moons ago, Berna, having mindfulness with parents, sessions with parents, and giving parents mindfulness in quite a large group, with candles and music playing. And actually, so I've just noticed that there's a great question about how do we get the majority of our parents to buy into the fact that the emotional, mental and social well-being of a child is just as important as achieving top grades or academic awards. And we did kind of touch on that. So what do we do for that? How do we move our parents away from putting everything, all of the pressures and all of the whole weight of their child and who they are and their identity on a grade, hanging on a grade? Berna.
I think for me, it's about personal stories. You know, when we have young people who come in and talk to other young people about their experiences and what they struggle with and how their journey has been in school and who the people were they connected with, that's very powerful for our children because it gives them a voice. And as a parent, I've learned from other parents in situations where I didn't know what's next. You know, my eldest is quite bright, very hardworking, lovely young man. I mean, if anybody wants to marry him off, let me know your details. You know, there's potential. But COVID really hurt him because he's an extrovert. And staying in a room for 2 years, doing his whole of his GCSEs on his own, isolated, he came out of it and he was a different child. And I didn't know what to do. I saw as a parent, you see your child. And the only thing that you have to go back on is how you've been raised. And that ingrained bit, when parents then started, we started a support group, and when parents started telling me what they did and what their children went through, I changed how I looked at my child. And suddenly, I didn't care that he got 60 or 70. I cared that he got up in the morning, brushed his teeth, and got ready for school, because he couldn't do that in the beginning. So when you have gone through a journey like that, and that is what parent voice is so important in this, is when a parent tells another parent, this is what we've gone through, it changes how they look at their own children. And it's not a cognitive process, because in our heads, we know this is important. We know there's enough in the media, there's enough research that tells us it's important. But when you hear the personal story of a parent who's walked this journey with their child, I always think that makes it so much more powerful. So when I have a coffee morning with parents about inclusion, for instance, I always have a parent in my pocket who tells a story about maybe a child with dyslexia, or I tell my story about my Josh who with cerebral palsy, and it changes how parents view their own journey. And it's a lonely road as a parent. And knowing that you are not the only one struggling with this, because we all want what's best for our children, with the best intentions in the world, we break our kids and we don't realize we're doing it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's changing that view. And then as teachers, I think the best thing that we can do is model good self-care for our children in our classes, because those children go home and they say, today my teacher sang to me, or today we did this activity, or today, somebody fell asleep in class and the teacher said, let's not wake them. So they go home with those stories as well, and those stories become their personal journeys. And I think that's how we change parents and get them on board. People worried about their children. We know this. In the UK, CAM's waiting list is 18 months if you're lucky. And what will happen is they will send it back to the school and say they're not crucial. They're not in the process of the next step, a threat to their own lives. So they get back out of the system. And it's unfair because there's no help available. So the school's role has changed in educating and making aware and supporting our parents with that.
Yeah, agreed. And actually schools are now, and schools and teachers are really, to some extent, primary caregivers in that way.
Yes, absolutely right.
And that one is almost ignored because we're still focused or putting the premium on the other stuff and not on the human being, the holistic well-being of our students. So
Tracy,
we know. Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say there. I think it's how you. I used to work in football when I was in the UK. I worked in the academy system for a professional football club, and I think that gets quite a bad, sports get quite a bad reputation for winning being, and when you think about education and its grades and it's that sort of thing, Berna's exactly right about school staff being the role models, and what you say is important, what you show is important. Listen, don't worry about the score, and then if the score's not right, you can see it in the coach's face, or if the grades aren't right, you can see it in the teacher's face. You've got to live, that sort of motto, haven't you? It's the skills we're developing. Don't worry about the score. You're just trying to gradually get better. Don't worry about anyone else in the class. It's about you. And I think that Berna just saying that there is really, really important. And it's about that education for the parents. And, listen, don't worry about the score. Don't worry about your grades. Your grades will get better. You just keep working hard, focusing, listening to the teachers, and those sort of really key messages, I think are really important. And part of that, the wellbeing program that we've got to deliver in schools has 100% got to include our parents.
So what does it look like for our staff? So what does that professional development look like for staff? Because I think, obviously, we talked about leadership. That whole piece comes from the leadership. If the leadership is there with you and understands and gets it, and if they're an educator like us, they do, and they lead their school, and that DNA becomes part of it, and everyone who joins are selected because of that. So what does it look like if you've come into a school, you've not founded a school, you've come in, your stakeholders are there, and you realize that you need to put this into your school. You need to start somewhere. What does professional development for teachers look like when it comes to self-care, supporting, but not having burnout, giving yourself some downtime, trying to support them with their own mental health? What does that look like? Does anyone know? I bet you do.
Well, I think it's a very difficult question. And I think it probably differs in every single sort of establishment you're in. And I don't think it would be a one size fits all. And I think someone was asking about emotional intelligence, and you've got to read the room of your staff, haven't you? And you've got to read the room of your context. And
Are we still in a situation where staff feel unable to come forward and say that they are finding the pressures too much for them? Because if we go back to the data, which I'm not sure if we even collect in schools at the moment, 50% looking at wanting to quit because of the mental and physical pressures on them and the stress. It means that we do need to do something quite urgently.
Tracy,
Bernie, say something.
I think we all know what it doesn't look like. I think we all know it's not pizza on Wednesday. It's not Wellbeing Wednesday where I serve ice cream. It's
and
not
coffees for the teachers. Yeah.
No, that's not what this looks like. I think what it looks like is asking the teachers, what do you need to be well? Because there's a huge movement in terms of neuroplasticity. And if you look at the research all over the world, people are becoming more attuned to how they think, how they perceive the world. There's a brilliant book, and I can't pronounce the author, but it's called The Courage to be Disliked. And it's a brilliant, brilliant book. And it's all about it's not about the event, it's about your experience of the event. And when we give teachers the opportunity, and I'm not talking about a post box and you post your well-being ideas. The question is, how do you feel on Sunday night before you have to go in on Monday morning? It's the same question we ask our children. If you've got that tummy feeling that tells you my body is in danger, my fight or flight response is there, I'm scared, I'm worried, then we need to start talking about what is needed to bring you down. And that's a question that your teachers can answer. And I honestly, I'm a huge supporter of having a conversation. I used to do tea with Ms. B, So it's a 10-minute slot and anybody can pop in and there's no judgment. And I make you a cup of tea and we just talk about your life. I don't ask you a single question about school because it's not about school. Yeah. It's about how do you feel on a Sunday night before you come into my school on a Monday morning. And I think if we change the conversation, the big worry with this approach is it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
But I think where we are in the world with the crisis that we're facing in wellbeing is we if we don't spend the time now, we won't have the time to spend.
Yeah. I listened to a wonderful speaker back in the UK in July, a guy called Stephen Russell. So Space to Be is the provision that we have in the UK. And we work a lot with looked after children. And he came from that background and he's a wonderful speaker. And he talked about drip by drip, day by day. This is not a thing, like you're saying, by having a post box to just post something through. This is little by little, day by day, changing the whole picture. And it will take us a long, long time. But if we don't do it, I think we're probably facing a bit of a crisis.
So, for example, would having counsellors available for the teachers, counselling or counselling sessions, or having people just available in the school, though, if you feel that you can't speak to your line manager or, what I'm thinking is a lot of teachers would not want to go to their head and say, I can't do this anymore. I'm feeling like this. I don't know how many teachers might feel that way, but certainly having some facility within the school where people feel like they can go and have tea with Mrs. B, and maybe Mrs. B is another teacher that you're friendly with, or whoever it is, or having those counsellors there who can deal with you. If you feel that way, surely schools need to kind of have a bit more expertise on the ground, is my point.
So my view on that one is that actually a lot of schools are doing quite well now. Because they're recognising the need for staff to access mental wellbeing services. So what we're seeing is more and more schools having better health insurance, so that staff can go outside of school. They don't have to declare it. A slight worry about having counsellors
on the ground
site is
confidentiality.
There's confidentiality, but also if I go into a counsellor, so there's one thing if you're having a bit of a rough day and you want to go in and pop in. When I was a counsellor, sometimes teachers would pop in and we'd have a cup of tea and a bit of a chat, and that's just about helping to contain them and settle them back down. But if they're really, really struggling with their mental well-being, schools still needs to be somewhere that's safe. And if you're going in to see a counsellor and then you're having, an intense counselling session, and then are we expecting them to then go and teach a class of 28 people? I would be really worried about that. So I think somebody's not having a very good day. They can't speak to their line manager, but they can maybe go and see the counsellor for to kind of let go of maybe some of what's going on for them. But having that health insurance where teachers can go, and it's got nothing to do with the school doesn't need to know about it, but they can go and see somebody, who's skilled in that field, and they can choose as well, because they may not actually like the counsellor at school, doesn't want to go anywhere near them. So I do think, again, it's like Rob was saying, not that one size fits all, but I think we do need to be very, very mindful of counsellors in schools starting to see members of staff as well as the children, because then again, if you've got a child at your door who's needing that help, and then you've got a member of staff, as a counsellor, I'd be like, well, what do you want me to do? Because I'm here for the kids.
Children before adults. Yeah.
100% agree. But I'm not sure that we're going in the right direction with things like medical insurance, for example. Some people won't even have medical insurance or be able to access, what they need. So it's how we approach those things, isn't it? But I totally take on board your points there. It was in one of the schools I was in, and the session would be after school in the evening, and teachers could just go, or members of staff could go and meet with not just the counsellor that deals with the kids, but also an external agency, just having a facility there for teachers, whether that's on site, whether that's people coming in. I don't know if we even audit our teachers and say, how are you feeling? I remember being part of Wellbeing, a KHDA Wellbeing survey, where all of our students for much of Dubai were all audited and asked about their lives, and everyone was interested in their lives, and schools that were part of that were able then to go back and say, wow, all of the girls in grade 8, we need to have conversations with them, or all of the boys in grade 10, and so on and so forth. And I'm not sure if we do have data in our schools anymore on well-being for staff or for students. What do you think about that?
I like that idea. And I also think that we need to get better at looking after each other. We have in South Africa, we have Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And the whole premise behind that is we know as leaders, we know our staff. We know the pressure points. My DSL, for instance, we took out a package just for the DSL so that they can have supervision, that they can almost decompress after sessions, because we know there's some jobs in schools that are harder than others. All schools are hard. All teaching is hard. We all work incredibly hard, but some jobs takes more out of you than others. And I think it's also providing that specialist care for those people. And I think a school and a company has duty of care towards those people in those key positions. Mm-hmm. But it also, again, starts with the leadership. And are we looking after our leaders? Because we just presume they're okay. But, when you are a head of school, and Tracy, when you're a head of school, you've got 725 priorities open at all times. And inclusion is just one. Well-being is just toilet paper is a priority. Okay? And are we looking after our leaders? Who is looking after the people who are looking after us? So I think it's that piece of how do we support the whole ecosystem and not just parts of it, because that's where we're falling down, I think, my opinion. Is we're very good at looking at parts of it or after parts of it, but we don't look at the whole ecosystem. So the whole ecosystem's not healthy. And we know that a tree can't grow if they have all the parts they need.
100%. And so the training or the support or advice for our leaders, where do they go? Where do they go when they're in that position? I know I can't close my laptop until I've felt like I've gone through the list, and I can go and sleep soundly once I've done that. That could be late.
At 3 a.m.
Not quite, but I need to kind of I've got my own way of dealing with me and my self-care, and how I know that I'm going to be, tomorrow's a new day and I'm going to get up and I'm going to want to go and it's going to be great. But I have to do certain things in order to be in that mindset. But yes, we haven't talked about leaders, and Berna, you're quite right. Where do they go when they feel like it's too much and they need support? We are approaching the end of the webinar, believe it or not, and we've gone through some amazing points. Rob, I think people are very interested in your toolbox. Some of the comments here, external counsellor who comes and assists with the girls and teachers, regardless of having anyone on site. That's what's happening in Zimbabwe from Tendai. Linda, supervision sessions, people who having different time, I think, to take care, like a social assistant. I think she's talking about the teacher. They come in for well-being for staff and students. There's a number of ideas here. A counsellor wants to hear more about your program, Rob. CPD for teachers. He said, yeah, that would be great. Yeah, Sadia has to be started from the head teacher and teachers to the learners, valuing everybody, listening to them, showing gratitude and celebrating small gestures, and having that time within the school to do that whenever that happens. And if it's going to be in the DNA, then it's going to be a daily situation. Guys, do you want to make any final comments? Just go around. Monisha, any golden nuggets for the guys on the webinar?
So for me, when I look at the entire ecosystem, in the end, I think the approach needs to be really compassionate, understanding that everyone's going through this stuff and we're just trying to help each other out. And to come from that place, it really requires you to be so neutral that the space that's there is non-judgmental. They're safe to express what they need to say. And you're also looking to ways to support them, right? I just feel that that's in the end the kind of environment that needs to be created, whether it's a top-down approach or the other way. It just feels like that level of inclusion is so important. I think that would transform it. Even if it's a small thing every day, I think it'll completely transform that.
Rob?
Yeah, I just think that it's been a brilliant hour, and some of the things that people have said are absolutely spot on. And it is like drip by drip, day by day. You can't go in and you're not going to sit on a course and pick up one thing that will change the whole culture of your school.
Sure.
It's not going to happen. It's got to come from the people, and it's got to come from all the people, as opposed, we can be as good a leader as we sort of think we are or hope to be or whatever, but you can't have an impact on well-being as one person. It's got to be the culture of everyone in your environment, in your school
100%.
environment. Yeah. And I think for people to be patient with that and have that understanding and know that these sort of things will take time, and as a teacher or a leader or whoever, you've got to learn what's right for your environment and your staff and your children and your parents, and just someone mentioned in the questions before about emotional intelligence, and I think that's really, really important. And you touched on training before, and how much training the teachers have in that emotional intelligence, and what do we value? Do we value just league tables and grades, or do we actually notice when children are kind, and how do we respond to that? And if you respond to that and you miss it, you've missed a huge opportunity.
Respond to it and reward it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a huge opportunity within your environment to sort of change the culture. What do you respond to? How do you respond to it? We would probably need 10 hours to discuss as a minimum. We've only scratched the surface a little bit tonight, haven't we? But it's been very interesting. So thank you.
Priya.
Yeah, I'm coming from the point of community, making our schools communities, a sense of belonging, and that it's for everyone. So it is for the parents, the teachers, the students. A student doesn't exist in a vacuum; they exist in their ecosystem.
And it takes a village, right?
It does take a village, yeah, and absolutely what Berna was saying about the parents, that really struck with me as well, Berna, about sometimes parents really don't know what, they think they're on their own, or they're not sure who to ask for help. They feel they're being judged. So, there are so many, you can do the education programs for the children, you can do PD for the staff, but finding a way to have our parents feel that they also are part of that community and that they're invested in the community, so bringing everybody together.
Yeah. Berna, last word.
It's a quick one. It's something that I've read about the other day. I love reading and quotes and things like that. But I read about intentional positive regard. And that basically just means that I go into every conversation with the intention of believing you mean it in the best possible way.
Excellent.
So whatever I hear, I take in the best possible way. And I think that has changed my leadership, and it's changed how I do many things. So I'm no longer trying to find your hidden motives. I just believe that you meant it in the best possible way.
Love it. And on that note, thank you to everyone for all of your input and all of your comments and all of your advice and strategies on this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Everyone.
Thank you so much, guys. It was a really, really interesting hour, and we've had some great questions and comments coming through. So we appreciate, sharing your expertise and insights today. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us on this discussion today as well. If anyone would like to connect with our speakers, or you've got any other follow-up questions, you can reach out to us at marketing@guesseducation.com and we can put you in touch. And before you go as well, we'd love your feedback. So once the webinar ends, you'll be redirected to a short survey, and your input really helps us to shape any future webinars. A recording of today's session will be available soon on the GESS YouTube channel and also on the GESS Education website. We'll also send it round via email to all attendees. Before we wrap up, I've a quick reminder about GESS Saudi Arabia 2025. It's taking place in Riyadh on the 26th to the 28th of May this year, and registration is live. So if you click the pop-up that I've just put on the screen now for you, you can register for free. GESS Saudi is a launch event following the success of a shorter conference last year that we did in Saudi. So this is going to be a full-scale exhibition and conference. I would love to see loads of you guys there. So thank you again for being a part of today's session, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, or hopefully in person at GESS Saudi Arabia. So take care and goodbye for now. Thank you.
Bye.